learning is a key indicator of a healthy brain.
Exactly.
And oftentimes, especially as we age, that is something that's forgotten. Just being able to do everyday function like I've done before and I've been doing over the years, no, that's not enough.
I guess for me, if we go back to what brain plasticity is or neuroplasticity is, right? We want to always be challenging the brain, right?
Yeah.
Even when we age.
Every form of learning has its merit, right? So, there are many cultures in which maybe just learning math and learning science is the most important and is considered, that's what will make you smart and that's what will really, help you develop your brain. That may not necessarily be true.
Learning is fundamentally about repetition, right? I guess the question is, how many times do you have to repeat for you to learn? Some level of stress causes you, so again, this increase in cortisol or your fight or flight response causes you to focus a lot better, a lot more, right?
Yeah.
But then again, it's to a point whereby you don't want it to be so high, whereby you're just super narrow in your focus.
Got it. It's not just learning for the sake of learning, but it sounds like learning is so important for our longevity.
Yeah.
The longevity of our brain, the longevity, therefore, of our body. And so if you don't have the motivation to learn just for the sake of learning, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the inclination, do it because it's what will keep you healthy long term.
Yeah.
That's what's important. Welcome to Think Shift, the podcast that invites you to change your perspective by exploring the incredible power of the human brain and mind. I'm your host, Mantazh Khanna, and I am a brain coach, a neuroscience researcher, and an advocate for holistic health and well-being. My own journey into this work began as a cancer survivor and a caregiver to a family member with Parkinson's. So I've seen firsthand just how profoundly our mind influences our body. And that's why I do what I do. Today, I work with individuals and organizations to build mental resilience, optimize brain health, and to support our healing using science-backed techniques. And as I pursue my own PhD in neuroscience and mind-body medicine, I bring the latest thinking to every conversation. In each episode of Think Shift, I sit down with leading experts to explore how neuroscience, cutting-edge technology, and even everyday practical tools can help us think better, live smarter, and thrive deeper. Every expert that is invited to this show is going to share real-world insights and actionable strategies that you and I can use every day. And my hope is that this isn't just a podcast, but an invitation to you to reimagine what's possible for your mind and body. So, if you're ready for some bold insights, some transformative science, and a few surprise aha moments along the way, you are in the right place. Let's start shifting. We all say that we want to keep learning. But have you ever really stopped to ask, what does learning actually mean? What's really going on inside our brain when we pick up a new skill? Or when does really learning stick versus just fade away? And why? Why does that happen? Well, today we're getting those answers. And I've got the perfect guest for it. Dr. Teo Wei Peng. He's not just any expert. He is an associate professor at the National Institute of Education. He's a deputy director at the Science of Learning in Education Center. And he's on the board of a longevity center here in Singapore. Yes, he is the real deal. So, not only has he spent countless years using cutting-edge brain imaging to uncover what happens when we learn, but he can also help us understand why some things we remember forever, why other things slip away. And the best part is that his research is not just for the classroom. It's also for people like you and for me. So if you want to learn better, remember more, keep that brain sharp for life, in this episode, we're breaking it all down. Whether you're a student, like I am, or a leader, or someone who loves to nerd out on how the brain works, This conversation is going to help you shift the way you think about learning. Let's get into it. Welcome to the studio, Wei Peng.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here with us. I am so excited to have you here because the last conversation we had was so enlightening about learning and all the different types of learning. And yes, I'm sure there are many people who are just looking to learn more about the same. So let me begin with the first question, the most basic one, I guess, which is, what is learning really? What's really going on inside our brain at that neurological level when we learn something?
Learning comes from many perspectives and dimensions, and I can't say that I know every dimension or every aspect. I look at it from a biological or neurological perspective, maybe from some social cultural type of perspective as well. But essentially, learning is how we acquire new information and how we retain that information and use that information into our daily lives, right? We learn a lot as we grow from a young child into an adult. But even as we age as well, we do learn, albeit maybe through very different mechanisms and pathways. It's really how we use knowledge and how we package that knowledge in order for us to utilize it in the best way possible. So that's essentially what learning is all about and how the brain can support that process as we age.
What is that looking like when, if I was to look at a brain, you look at brain maps, what's really happening when learning is occurring? What do you see?
There are many different phases of learning, or there are several different phases of learning, right? So we have short-term learning, which is really an acquisition of skill or knowledge for a short period of time. If we don't reinforce that learning or reinforce that practice or that training, we sort of forget that skill or we lose that ability or that knowledge, right? So we know learning happens in phases. In the short term, typically when we first start to learn a skill, it's very tough or it's very difficult because it's something that you have not done before, potentially something that you have not experienced before. So our brain sort of goes into a little bit of an overdrive in trying to make sense of what's going on. How can I make this process a lot easier? Typically, when we look at experiments and when we read papers, we always see this phase of learning whereby there's all these parts of the brain that lights up or that shows red on the picture. Over time, what we also do see that if we were to track that progress, this pattern of brain activation actually shifts or it alters. So as we get more proficient, as we get better at doing that skill, we don't get as many areas that light up anymore, right? So it sort of indicates to us that the brain is now more efficient in processing some of this information.
Right. And of course, our body is all catered towards efficiency.
Yes, that's right.
And when you say light up, just for the sake of the people who might be listening or watching this, what does light up indicate? What is it a signal of? When the brain lights up, what does that mean? Is it blood flow to that part of the brain? Is it electrical activity? What does that mean?
So it just depends on what instrument you use to measure brain activity, right? So there are many different types of ways that we can measure brain activity. The two most common ones that we use in research are MRI or magnetic resonance imaging or functional MRI, fMRI, and EEG, right? So these are the two very common ways of measuring brain activity. EEG measures the electrical communication between neurons, whereas MRI sort of looks at change in oxygenation in various parts of the brain. Can look at blood flow as well and structural changes that happen. So how the brain changes physically as we grow or as we learn certain things.
Right.
It really depends largely on what methods we use, but generally what we measure are the electrochemical processes that happen as we learn, the metabolism that is required to support that process as we learn. Right? So those are the things that we usually measure.
So if I were to connect that with your previous point of the brain getting more efficient over time as we repeat that same skill again and again, those processes, those electrochemical processes you just spoke about, they become more efficient. Is that what you're trying to say?
Generally, that's the main idea.
Got it. Okay. Very interestingly, you already sort of hinted at it. You said, there are different types of learning. And I think that is something that is so fascinating. You mentioned short-term memory, long-term memory. I also think of like different forms of learning in terms of like a procedural learning, which is something you learn over process and maybe over time. Then you also have just conceptual learning. It's like the one-time thing and you're exposed to it and there's a concept that you've just got to kind of connect the dots with.
Yeah.
Then there's emotional learning as well.
Yeah.
So many different types of learning. How do you differentiate between different types of learning, and what is the distinguishing factor that you use?
If we talk about everyday life and everyday activities, I think when we learn, we sort of use all these different skill sets or all these different aspects of learning, right? Learning is not just procedural, it's not just emotional, it's everything in real life. If you think about learning math, right? Math is largely logic and it's largely procedural as well. 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4, etc. Right? So that's very procedural and that's very logical. In many cases as well, in order for you to learn well, right, there needs to be all these other elements that come into play for you to reinforce that learning or that concept that you're trying to learn. Other factors, things like emotions, things like your motivation to learn, how stimulated are you to learn as well, that would either cause you to learn better or cause you to learn a little bit slower. I mean, ultimately, we will still learn. It's just how fast and how much can you grasp in a sitting or over a period of time. In everyday situations, we tend to use all these different aspects of learning to help us learn. But in a research environment, typically we control for some of these outcomes, right? So, for example, we might design a task that would only just target procedural learning, right? Or we might design a condition that maybe stimulates your emotions a little bit more and see how that affects learning, right? So it's sort of a slightly different way that we sort of tease out what learning is. But essentially, if you were to apply this in everyday situations, we sort of use almost everything.
So it sounds like in the research environment, you do use similar categories or labels for types of learning.
Yeah.
Are there any other that perhaps I haven't mentioned that you regularly use in the research world?
It just depends on what the context of learning are you trying to do, right? I mean, we can learn a lot of different things, right? Especially in education, we have academics whereby we have to learn language, we have to learn math, physics, science. I come from a physical education department, so we study how we learn different skills, movement skills, for example, or how children develop these skills as they grow. And depending on what you learn, you might sort of use a slightly different strategy to learn, right? There is some evidence to sort of suggest some form of academic learning is sort of related to movement learning, for example, right? So there are papers showing good correlation between, say, math skills or math abilities to movement abilities, and potentially this has got to perhaps do something to do with procedural movement, right? So in math, you use a lot of logic and procedures. In movement, we do the same thing as well, maybe in a different context, right? But those underlying base skills that you learn in both those situations may actually be the same, and they sort of support different type of learning aspects, or learning of different things.
Do these different types of learnings show up in different areas of the brain, or do they look pretty consistent?
I think that when we learn about the brain, and this is something that even we teach it in tertiary level, that we teach that, okay, this part of the brain is involved in one aspect or one function, and that part of the brain is another function, right? In reality, we sort of see that the whole brain generally supports learning, right? So we need multiple aspects of the brain to fire at the same time or to activate at the same time to support different aspects of learning, right? It's not just one or the other.
Okay.
It's everything, and maybe some parts may have more activity at one stage of learning, and then another part sort of comes in when we've learned a specific skill, right?
Okay.
Let's say learning math versus learning how to kick a ball, right? We may have areas that are common in both type of skills, but we of course have areas that are very distinct from both types of skills. So in learning math, we probably look at numerical cognition, whereby we have to understand that 2 is bigger than 1, 3 is bigger than 2.
Right.
These sorts of concepts, right? Whereas in movement, if we learn how to kick a ball, we learn how to move, how to place the foot, and we also learn that if I want to kick a ball further, I use a lot more force or more energy, right? And that's controlled by a different part of the brain. So there are areas that sort of subserve both types of learning potentially, but there are of course areas that are different in nature as well.
Perhaps the underlying message of what you're trying to say then, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that every form of learning has its merit, right? So, there are many cultures in which maybe just learning math and learning science is the most important and is considered, like that's what will make you smart and that's what will really, help you develop your brain. But that may not necessarily be true, because it sounds like even sports, movement, etc., form a different form of learning and create a healthy brain overall, because learning does light up your entire brain in varying degrees, depending on the type of learning.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Is it, when you're learning, is there a difference between going deep versus going wide? In that, is it better to take a skin and hone into it and go deeper and deeper into it, or a particular subject? Or is it better to diversify a skill set and learn a variety of different skill sets? Or, of course, both.
I think that's a practical question rather than a neurological question or a mechanistic question, right?
But do you see a difference in brain health for people who tend to be deep experts versus sort of jack of all trades?
Having both is great, right? I mean, if you have very deep knowledge and you have very broad knowledge as well, I think that is ideally where we want to be, right? But in many cases, it's never that scenario. You either need a lot of time to develop deep knowledge and broad knowledge, or you don't have time, whereby you can only sort of focus on one. And typically, a lot of it is really down to the practicalities of what you're doing in your everyday life. So, for example, as an academic, we need to develop very deep knowledge, right? If we look at academia, whereby we have to be more interdisciplinary, whereby we have to collaborate more with other fields, that we are starting to see this sort of shift from not only just having deep knowledge, but also at least understanding what different fields are able to bring to your field of work.
The connection,
right? And even if you don't have those skill sets, you can make those connections, and then it's almost like a conveyor belt, right? Whereby every department has a skill set, but they need to be able to work with each other as well. Again, if you were to ask me that question, of course, having deep and broad skill sets is great. And ultimately, I think that's where you need to head to. But usually it starts with either being an expert in your field or sort of a generalist in your field. And there's no right or wrong to that.
Yes, I think depending on what the role is, that may be a requirement. But the reason why I was asking this question was more from a long-term brain health perspective and an aging perspective, right? With multiple neurodegenerative diseases now becoming much more common, including things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. Do you see in research a difference between those people who go really deep into one expertise versus those who go wide?
I don't think there's direct evidence now to sort of suggest one is better than the other. I guess for me, if we go back to what brain plasticity is or neuroplasticity is, right, is that we want to always be challenging the brain, right? Even when we age as well. Learning a new skill or learning new knowledge is always important to keep your brain active, right? A healthy brain is a learning brain. How would you measure the health of your muscle or of your bone, all right? If you're able to get off the chair easily, if you're able to run, skip, jump, and hop, it sort of indicates that the muscle and bones are healthy.
Right.
Because it's able to do those activities. It's the same thing for the brain as well, right? If the brain is not able to learn, then it's not going to be functioning well, or it's not going to be very healthy in that sense. Keeping your mind active, being exposed to new experiences, be willing to challenge yourself is important to ensure that your brain is always healthy.
I just want to make sure I re-emphasize and echo what you just said, because it's so important. Learning is a key indicator of a healthy brain.
Exactly.
And oftentimes, especially as we age, that is something that's forgotten. Just being able to do everyday function like I've done before and I've been doing over the years is usually considered, look, I'm still able to remember some things. I'm still able to go to the supermarket. I'm still able to drive. That means I have a healthy brain. No, that's not enough. What you have to do is constantly learn. And the ability to be able to learn is your indicator of a healthy brain. I think that's a message that's really important to pass down to people who are listening or watching. But a very important word that you used was challenge your brain. So tell us a little bit more about challenge. Why is challenge so important?
I think it's like any other organ in the body or any other physiological systems in the body, right? I mean, we mentioned earlier on that the body always wants to be more efficient, which is great. In order for you to improve, in order for you to get better, we need to be challenging that system at some point. And when I mean challenge, I don't mean that we overstimulate it to a point whereby it becomes unbearable or difficult. I mean, the level of difficulty is needed for you to improve your bodily functions, even exercise, right? Exercise is a form of stress. It's a form of challenge. It's a physical form of challenge. Your muscles and bone recognize that stress and it gets stronger to meet those challenges. It becomes efficient. And then you have to challenge it again.
Right.
The process of learning requires you to somewhat challenge your brain to a point whereby it becomes easy for you to do a relatively more difficult task, right? So it's that same process that or that same sort of analogy that I usually make. And if you imagine as we grow older, our bodily functions actually do decline, right? Because again, with age, with stress or chronic stress across our lifespan, we want to ensure that we maintain some level of challenge to the brain as well, just so that it's keeping up with any changes that
level of. If from a physiological point of view, is there something happening to the neurons when we are challenging? Are there more neural connections forming when there's a challenge versus when there isn't?
When we are born generally with all the connections, physical connections that we need. That we have. And as we learn certain skills and as we get more efficient in certain skills, some of these connections switch off. Right? So in order to be efficient and in order for information to travel from point A to point B in the brain, as we learn, all these redundant connections get sort of switch off so that it is the path of least resistance, so to speak, to get from point A to point B. Learning a new skill over here, therefore, challenges these connections to then switch on again. Right? So it's like an on and off switch whereby if the brain deems that you need that connection to be formed or to be active, it will switch it on. And I mean, of course, unless you have got a brain injury or a stroke whereby there is physical damage. That's kind of an analogy that I typically would make in a sense that we have those connections there. And it's usually as we grow older, we will rely on past experiences as well, right? So it's not that we have to learn things from scratch.
Right.
Learning a second skill is typically much easier than learning a brand new skill.
Yeah.
Or for example, if you learn how to ride a bike when you're younger and then you have not rode a bike for 10 years and then you ride it again, you might be wobbly at the start, but then you sort of get back.
Comes back
easier.
again, yeah.
So our brain is always associating learning with past memories. Have I done it before? Or have I utilized the skill before? If I haven't, what's the closest skill that I can use to replicate the movement that I need to do or the skill that I need to do, right? So it's never back to baseline,
right?
Or back from the start when you're learning a new skill.
So it's almost like a reserve that you're tapping into.
Yeah.
Of similar memories or perhaps the same memory that you've done before. And then you're working on building that further.
Yeah.
Also a really important point because it means it's good to keep banking
of course.
experiences, these skills, these memories so that if you need them in the future, you have that reserve to tap into.
Yep, exactly.
Let's talk a bit about repetition and learning, right? Like we know that when we repeat something, we tend to forget it less going forward. And of course, if it's just a one-time thing, it never really comes back, right? Same thing with especially names of people. And I know this is something I struggle with.
Yeah.
I forget names of people. I will never forget a face, but I will forget names of people. And unless that is something I have repeated and actually said out loud to the person again and again, like, hello, Wei Peng, hello, Wei Peng.
Yes.
That's how I will remember it.
Yeah.
Why does that happen? And what is the trick behind, therefore, for larger skills to be learned?
Right.
Is repetition a really important element?
I mean, learning is fundamentally about repetition, right? I guess the question is how many times do you have to repeat for you to learn, right? So in the past, again, if I look back at my background in sports science and me practicing sport when I was a lot younger, is that usually if we want to be an expert, or in the past at least, 20, 30 years ago, they always say that you need at least 10,000 hours for you to be an expert in a skill. I mean, there's a lot of research now to sort of to debunk that, in a sense that we maybe don't need 10,000 hours. We probably need a lot less than 10,000 hours. But essentially, we still do need repetition, right? The key here is what is that sweet spot whereby you don't have to keep on repeating that skill before it gets committed into long-term memory.
Right.
And even if it gets committed into long-term memory, right, even after a period of time, let's say, again, using the riding bicycle example, you do lose a little bit of that skill, but you don't completely forget that skill.
Right.
So once it's sort of committed into long-term memory, it generally stays there. I'm for the fact that you need repetition. It's how do we create scenarios with those repetitions that we can enhance that memory further, so that you don't need that many repetition for you to remember that skill.
What does that say about things that are some learnings that stick and some that just don't stick? Why, to most people, I said, for example, like names and faces, that faces stick but names don't stick. Why does that happen? I mean, it's still the same person, one instant, no repetition, right? I've met that person once, but that face will stick. The name won't.
It comes back to our initial discussion around different forms of learning and what it takes to learn, right? So learning, as I've mentioned, is not just biological, but there are also a lot of social influences as well. Motivation is one. So obviously something that you're more motivated or if you're more passionate about, let's say, the brain. Let's say again in neuroscience, there are many different parts of the brain that, I can't remember every single part. I have to look at the atlas sometimes to go, okay, this is what and this is what.
Yes.
But the areas in which I research in, because I do it every day, I teach it every semester, I'm more familiar with it, and because that's something that I'm heavily invested in understanding that skill well. So a lot of times it's really about the environment, right? So again, when it sort of links back to that repetition question that you ask, if you are invested, that's one. And if you're in an environment that's stimulating, it stimulates you to learn, that's another factor. You probably don't need as many repetitions because you are more focused on actually learning that information, that piece of information, right? It sort of comes down to focus and attention. Learning is really about focus and attention. So the more attention you pay to this piece of information that you're learning, the more likely it is that you're going to retain that information. Especially in a classroom, right? So why do some students learn better? Why do some students learn a lot worse? It's probably because the teacher is not able to capture everyone's attention that well, or sometimes a student might sort of get distracted by something else.
Right.
So in that sense, you creating the environment for you to be optimal in your learning becomes essential.
Right. And I think for teachers who may be listening in, that's an important message too. A very hard task.
Yes.
We already know teaching is such a
Yes.
hard task,
Yes.
right? And you would know this,
Yes.
Given your teaching profession. But capturing their attention, capturing students' attention, especially it's a large classroom with numerous students in there.
Exactly.
And then sustaining that attention as
Yeah.
well can be so hard.
Yeah.
And of course, what you don't have control over at all, then is also their internal motivation.
Yes.
Right. So for people who might be parents that are listening in, would you have any words of advice for them when they want their kids? And I'm all ears here because I'm a parent with kids who are also learning, and for myself actually. So how do you create that attention stimulating environment? And also, of course, have that motivation to learn the things. You may not always be motivated to learn the things you need to in school, especially.
In part, why I say this is because the way that we learn in the past, so you and I, we were born sort of in the previous century. Sounds a little bit old, but so a lot of the stuff that we learn, or the ways that we sort of are familiar about learning, is you sit down and you grind it out, right? You copy notes and you do whatever, and it sort of sticks in your memory. I think nowadays education is a very different ball game altogether, because there's all these different tech and different gadgets that you can use to to your advantage or disadvantage, right? So again, it's sort of a double-edged sword. So it's really trying to understand what are some of the motivators for a child. How can we optimize learning for that child? So it could be something like maybe a podcast might be a way that people or young students learn nowadays, whereby they can sit down in an environment that they're comfortable with and just focus on what we say, right? So something like that. Or social media, whereby it's a 30-second clip on something that is important or a piece of information that's important, right? So, I think right now we sort of have to rethink how we can deliver information, because there's a lot more ways in which we can deliver information in a more creative manner as well.
In a more stimulating manner.
In a more
to what you were
stimulating
saying
manner
before,
as well, right? On the flip side of things, because of social media and because of advancement in technology and how we show information, we also do see that attention span potentially is sort of getting less.
I
and
was
less,
just going to
right?
get there. Yes. So how do we balance that?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think using or engaging with educational technology is great.
Yeah.
Leveraging on is important. But I think you sort of still need a little bit of old school element in there. So, for example, if you have a book in front of you and you read, or whether it's on an iPad, it's words, it activates more brain regions than looking at a video,
Okay.
right? Or when you read words, your brain has to process what that means, and it has to create a mental image of what those words actually mean. So when I say, think of a pink elephant, you don't see the word think of a pink elephant. You see a pink elephant, right? Whereas if you look at a video, all the information that you need is already in there. When it displays a pink elephant, it's a pink elephant. There is no
Processing.
There is some processing, but the level of creativity that you need for that processing is much less, because all the information is there for you.
So the challenge is less.
Yes,
as to
exactly.
what you said before.
Exactly.
Right.
Things like, there's a lot of research now looking at how writing, the skills that we used to have in school, again, challenges your brain a lot more than just typing.
Yeah.
In many cases, we can recognize what we type as the shape of the letters, but when we ask someone to write it out, they might have a lot of difficulty in doing that. A lot of tech companies or education technology companies, they might have iPads that now allow you to write instead of listening to podcasts and reading on a Kindle, for example, or reading on an iPad might be an alternative solution.
I certainly feel that even in like an everyday task, right? Let's say it's a shopping list, a grocery list. If I have that written down versus typed out or sent to me, there's definitely a difference in the number of items I'm going to remember.
Yes, yeah,
versus
exactly,
not.
exactly.
Going back to that student environment being stimulated, let's address this question of learning under pressure versus not. I mean, obviously, if you ask any layman, they'd be like, I don't want to learn under pressure. It's fine. Like, I'd rather be much more relaxed and take my time to learn. Is it almost better to have some amount of pressure because you have that, I don't know, cortisol spike that gets you to really rush into it and force yourself to learn?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm completely wrong about this, but what does it mean? What does pressure mean for someone that's learning?
I think a little bit of pressure is a good thing. I mean, we shouldn't see pressure as a negative thing, right? I mean, in everyday life, in everyday situation, we are pressured to do almost anything, right? I mean, work, even in family. It's how you regulate that pressure. And I think this is something that we need to teach a little bit more in school. I think the message now is that we are all in a pressure cooker, and society is very pressured and whatnot. Yes, I agree. And I think the issue is, how do we manage that? And how do we say it's okay to let go a little bit, right? But ultimately, we need to also recognize that for us to function well. So for me personally, I think a little bit of pressure is good, just like challenge. I mean, you can say challenge is pressure as well, right?
Yeah.
So we need some challenge. We need a little bit of fight or flight response for you to really focus and pay attention. But, you don't want that to be chronic or sustained, right? I think that's where the negative aspects come in. I mean, I think to be a good teacher or to be a good coach, we need to, of course, put pressure for an athlete to grow or for a student to learn. But then it's also recognizing when to actually stop that pressure as well,
when
right?
Is it too much?
Yeah, when is it too much? And then you sort of bring it down. Yes, we want some pressure, but we also don't want it to be overly off top. It's almost like this inverted U sort of relationship.
But if physiologically, is there any difference? Like if we are under a stress environment, does learning improve or decrease if you're under a stressful situation?
Some level of stress causes you, so again, this increase in cortisol or your fight or flight response causes you to focus a lot better, a lot more, right?
Yeah.
But then again, it's to a point whereby you don't want it to be so high, whereby you're just super narrow in your focus.
Got it. Okay. So there is a certain positive
yes, of course,
effect of it.
Yeah.
Okay. How about feedback? That's another really interesting element of learning, right? There are some people who thrive on feedback and need it as quickly as possible to quickly make the changes and the adjustments. And there are others who just don't want that and actually do better learning themselves and iterating, reiterating, experimenting themselves, which is honestly it's another form of feedback itself. But where does and how does feedback play a role when it comes to learning?
Yeah.
How can we optimize that for our learning?
In any type of learning, we require some level of feedback. Even if it's a small level of feedback, you still need it for learning, because then you know what is whether you're on the right track or not, right? Wherever you want to go. Again, this I think sort of stems from individual differences in things like personality, motivation, and whatnot, right? Giving quality feedback is important and it's good, right? If you are seeing a learner maybe constantly not doing so well or failing at certain tasks, coming in, providing feedback for them to see what or to compare what are they maybe potentially not doing right versus what they potentially should be doing. I think that's good, right? And that's usually what's needed for learning. Learning is about making mistakes, understanding where you've gone wrong, and then remediating that process, right? But then again, we also don't want to create a learner that's over reliant on feedback.
Exactly, and I think actually, I would almost turn the tables and say, as parents, right, or as educators, I think the timing of the feedback makes a very big difference.
Yes.
Because often we're too soon to jump in there and rescue the learner and say, no, don't do it this way, do it this way.
Yes.
That will improve it. But I think there's merit in the learner suffering a bit, right? Figuring it out themselves a bit.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have any advice on that, on how do you figure out when is that right time as an educator yourself, on when to intervene versus allowing the student to continue figuring it out themselves.
In Singapore's context, I think a lot of teachers are sort of on a time pressure to deliver a certain level and amount of content to students, right? So therefore they need students to learn as quickly as possible, and sometimes that then leads to maybe providing either too much feed or spoon feeding, essentially, right? Things to students, right? Again, I agree with you. I think if you want true learning to happen, students need to, or the learner needs to understand what is negative about the learning process and learning outcome, and then figuring a way to overcome that negative learning experience, right? And this is where probably you can come in and go, okay, what do you think went wrong? What are there things that you think you can do to change this, right? So feedback in a way could be in a form of questioning them or asking them, what in their own experience, how would they do this differently?
So self-evaluation.
Yeah, that in itself is learning, right? Whereby you have to think a lot more. It's not just me giving you the answers to do it. There are some strategies around this, and again, I think in sport, in high-level sport as well, usually it depends on the athlete's experience level, so whether they're novice athletes or whether they are really elite athletes. I think in the novice athlete, you kind of want feedback to be a bit more, not descriptive, but something that can sort of challenge them a little bit, so they can understand what's right and what's wrong. At a very high level, you want something that's more prescriptive, so bend your knees a little bit more, or you want to be moving faster around this bend, because they already know how to do that skill. It's just that little tweak that they have to do in order for them to optimize performance. Right. So depending on the level or skill level, depending on how much time you have as well, I think that's a very practical consideration.
Yeah.
Right. So again, this is a very subjective matter as well.
Right.
So you sort of have to look at what the learned disposition is.
Are there any tactics or tricks that you use with your students, other than perhaps getting them to self-evaluate what they could do any better? What kind of strategies do you use?
Coming to a grad program is usually the first year or first 6 months at least. The learning curve is very steep, right? Because they're now being challenged a lot more than when they were in the undergrad. In the undergrad, you sort of learn very broad things, a broad array of skills. Now, as a postgraduate student, you learn deep skills.
Right.
And you have to figure out things like time management. You have got assignments due. You have your research to be done. You have supervisors barking down your neck like myself. So how do you manage all these different stresses and all these different challenges? And a lot of times I actually realize that how they learn is actually through each other's experiences, right? So the four of them would sort of get together and they would sort of troubleshoot things, because everyone sort of brings a different experience to the plate.
Right.
So in many cases, learning is a very social thing as well.
Yeah.
If you and I, we have the same goal to achieve, it's more likely that we'll be collaborating well with each other to achieve those goals.
Right.
And I think I sort of come in to sort of facilitate some of these processes that happen. And unless they are really stuck in what they're doing, I might sort of go, oh, have you considered this? Or have you considered that? Have you read this paper? Have you thought about, writing it this way? Right? So again, my answers are never like, okay, you need to write this. It's more, have you thought of this? Something that forces them or gets them to think more about the solutions and outcomes and how can they find those solutions.
I'm kind of trying to collect these gold nuggets that you're dropping throughout the episode, and both as a parent but also as a student, right? I'm doing my PhD, and it's constant self-discipline and problem solving and making sure that I'm reaching the finish line. And I think a big important part of my learning as well is the social learning. It is all the other students in the healthcare space who are also struggling with similar challenges and share how they're able to overcome it. And I can perhaps pick up a few of those and share a few of mine.
Sure.
So I think what you're saying is as you relate, the relatedness of your challenges and perhaps even the solutions can also help improve learning. That's such a great note actually to start thinking of how we close this episode, because I would ask you one question, which, I did not ask you at the beginning of the episode, but I wanted to keep it especially for the end. What is the one message that, or it could be, a bucket of messages perhaps, but your key message for people who are listening in, people who are watching this, who are curious about the brain, who love to learn, perhaps are unable to learn and have an inability to learn at the moment. What would you say to these people about what you would love for them to know about learning?
I think one thing that I want people to know is that learning can happen anywhere at any time, right? Especially in this day and age. We can receive information instantaneously. Whether the information is right or wrong, it's a separate question, but by and large, we can receive information on a phone, on anywhere. So there is no reason as to why you cannot learn, right? Unless you tell me that you have got a condition that limits you, but even then, you still can actually do learn, right? I even say people with stroke as well relearn skills. They relearn certain things. My key message here is that there is never a good time for you to start learning. The best time to start learning is now. You can learn anything. Go and experience something that's novel. Do something that you always wanted to try and do. A lot of research that I do is always targeted at the midlife and sort of late life type of lifespan, right? And one key thing that I notice is that older people sort of have this misconception that they're old or they're older and therefore they cannot learn. I mean, they can learn. It's just that maybe learning is a very different manifestation for them. Right. Again, I will admit, learning a language, it's much easier when you're younger than it is older. But
Sure.
it's also if you're in the right context and if you actually make the effort to go and learn,
Yes.
it can actually be easy because you have all these life experiences already.
Right.
Learn something in a fun environment, right? So I think as we are older, when we learn it a bit more intrinsically because there's no real pressure for us to learn something new, right? It's not like we have to take an exam or a test for it.
Yes.
Embrace learning. It doesn't have to be formal. It can be informal forms of learning.
Yeah.
Being social as well is important. Have an open mind, listen to different perspectives, and you might sort of learn something from it as well, right? So I think that for me is my key message.
Yeah, and I think I will just underscore that. Thank you, first of all, for sharing that. But I would underscore it with, it's not just learning for the sake of learning, but it sounds like learning is so important for our longevity, the longevity of our brain, the longevity, therefore, of our body. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have the motivation to learn just for the sake of learning, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the inclination, do it because it's what will keep you healthy long term. That's what's important. And that's actually one of the big reasons why I wanted to bring this topic to ThinkShift, to this podcast, and have you as our guest, because I think that aspect of learning is often forgotten. All right, Wei Peng, are you ready for your rapid fire questions?
Sure.
Yes?
Sure, let's go.
All right. Okay, so if you could spend a day inside anybody else's mind, who would it be and why?
I would like to spend a day in my father's brain, or father's mind. I mean, he's always been my motivation figure. Although I think growing up, he has always been a strict person. But I think, some of the things that goes on in his head, I would like to pick his brains a little bit.
You'd like to pick his brains a bit? Okay. All right, great. Yeah. What's your favorite brain hack or a brain ritual that you do that you can't live without?
So one thing that I've started doing now again is actually starting to write using pen and paper again. I think that's something that I've not done not say that I haven't done it, but I haven't used that skill for a very, very long time, right? Writing helps me remember stuff a lot better rather than typing it on the phone, right? So that's something that I do myself a lot more. I have a pen, notebook, pen, and just write.
A daily non-negotiable that you do for your brain?
Have coffee.
Love it. All right. A myth about the brain that you'd love to see busted?
I think it's already been busted by the left brain, right brain concept, right?
I see. Okay.
We don't just use either the left or right brain. I think we use both. It's just maybe in certain functions or certain process, maybe the left side is a little bit more active, but by and large, both left and right need to work in unison to produce an outcome.
All right, last question on the rapid fire. A book, a tool, a person, could be even a movie, but something that changed your perspective, shifted your thinking for the rest of your life.
I was introduced to this movie called Still Alice by my wife. And it is a story about a neuroscientist that's got dementia, and it's a very rapid form of dementia. So it chronicles the progression in which symptoms happen and how it affects not only her life, but also her social circle. So her husband, kids, and whatnot.
And very quickly, why did that impact you?
If you have never experienced that before, if you've never been a caregiver for someone with dementia before, it's very hard to put yourself into that person's shoes, right? And it's also very hard for you to imagine what it's like to have your memory slowly fading as well.
Right.
And to a point whereby you're not able to speak, you're not able to control your bowel movements, for example.
Right.
So it's one of those things that really emphasize the importance of what I do, I guess, in my field, whereby I'm trying to understand how we learn and how we prevent learning loss.
Yeah, quite a shift in thinking for you, looking at it from the other person's perspective.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And again, thank you for sharing all the gold nuggets, the great knowledge you've shared today on this episode. I think I've really taken away from it so much more about what the different types of learning are,
Sure.
why is learning so important, the elements of learning that make it sticky, like challenge, like feedback, the types of feedback that should be given. These are all really wonderful strategies for us to know and to take away. And I hope that the audience that is listening in or is watching will take away the same and remember how important learning is for our long-term brain health. So with that, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for doing everything that you do.
No, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here.
Thanks for tuning in to Think Shift, where we uncover the science and stories that help us explore the incredible power of the human brain and mind. I hope this episode sparks something new for you, a fresh idea, a shift in perspective perhaps, or even a small step towards a healthier mind. If it did, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and even share it with someone who might need this conversation too. Your support helps us bring more powerful insights to curious minds like yours around the world. Next up, we've got more experts, bold ideas, and surprising discoveries coming along your way. So stay tuned. And until then, remember, big shifts start small. Stay curious and keep shifting.